Hello, welcome to the next installment of the Law & Order video series, where I look at and unpack stories from games. In this one, we'll be looking at the story behind Blair Witch. Set in the same haunted forest as the cult classic found footage horror film from 1999, this game, despite having mixed reviews due to its tedious nature in places, was eerie, creepy, and actually did a great job of making you feel uneasy and that you were not alone. The story was, however, extremely convoluted and very difficult to piece together unless you fully research it, which we'll discover in this video. The game has as many as 4 different endings, but I'll do my best to incorporate all of them into the video, but the explanation of the plot narrative will be driven towards what is considered the bad ending. Don't worry, this is on purpose and you will see why later. That being said, if you haven't played the game and you want to, there are going to be spoilers in this video, obviously, so here is your 5-second warning. The year is 1996, 2 years after 3 students went missing while filming a documentary about the local legend of the Blair Witch in the Black Hills Forest in Burkittsville, Maryland. Ellis Lynch, accompanied by his trusty dog Bullet, are driving along listening to a radio report about a boy called Peter Shannon who has gone missing. Arriving at a clearing, Ellis took one of the police radios and contacted the sheriff, Emmett Lanning, informing him that he is joining the search with the help of his dog Bullet. Bullet finds Peter's hat and picks up a scent, but while following Bullet, Ellis trips and falls, gets separated from Bullet and appears to have a PTSD episode which is halted when his dog returns to his side. Eventually, after following a trail and ending up at a temporary campsite, Ellis finds a working camcorder and opens it, only to seemingly pass out and wake up hours later inside the tent, with night having fallen. Ellis plays a red tape on the camcorder and, bizarrely, it seems to allow the manipulation of reality, specifically making a toy police car appear on the ground in the tape, allowing it to appear for Ellis to actually pick up in the physical world. Sheriff Lanning radios and tells Ellis to stay put, but Ellis refuses as he doesn't want Bullet to lose the scent. Ellis and Bullet travel deeper into the pitch black forest. Bullet freaks out a few times due to the presence of a few effigies, which Ellis destroys in order to comfort his dog.
Is it a sign of worship? It's okay, buddy. It's all gone.
These effigies are accompanied by creepy pictures of people stood hunched over with their backs to the camera. They eventually arrive at a strange white tree with black vines and are ambushed by creepy and really fast creatures of some sort, but Ellis is able to use his flashlight to fight them off. Continuing on, Ellis discovers some war trenches, but on mentioning this over the radio to Lanning, Lanning doesn't believe him. Either way, Lanning agrees to try and find the white tree and meet Ellis there. In the meantime, Ellis finds another red tape, which this time is of a mysterious man walking with Peter, and the man stops him as he drops his baseball. Of course, this baseball appears due to the manipulation of reality, and Ellis gives it to Bullet to catch another scent. They end up back at the tree, still not having found Peter. Ellis and Lanning talk over the radio, claiming that they are both standing under the white tree, but neither can see each other. Lanning berates Ellis, then goes silent. Later on, Ellis finds Lanning's truck near the tree with a note on the window stating to go to channel 3 and say "the light." A mysterious voice says to turn on the lights in the truck, and as Ellis does this, the night is gone and day appears. Now daytime, Ellis and Bullet continue through the forest and Bullet finds something. It's Lanning's corpse underneath some debris. Another red tape shows the killer murdering Lanning and then burying something. The manipulated reality gives them a clue as to where the murderer may be. Tappy East Creek sawmill in the forest. They make their way there and cross the river, only when they go to cross it again, a second time, it's completely dried up. Ellis picks up what appears to be a soldier's helmet and suffers another PTSD episode. Running from the apparent threat, Ellis and Bullet end up running to safety in the form of a massive hollow tree. Ellis starts hearing voices and loses consciousness. Ellis then wakes up bizarrely at the same campsite again, and after a long, stressful and arduous journey and after encountering more strange creatures, Bullet and Ellis make it to the sawmill where they find the corpse of Todd McKinnon. It's made clear from a red tape that McKinnon had been murdered. Ellis then meets the mysterious man who abducted Peter and killed McKinnon. The man asks if Ellis sees her and then knocks him out, exclaiming that Peter has to die as it's her will, whatever the heck that means. Ellis wakes up later and finds that the abductor and killer called Carver has dragged him to the same campsite again, but this time it looks different. Using a new camcorder which picks up a seemingly invisible white paint, Ellis follows the trail and comes across a deer carcass. Carver tells him over the radio to make the same symbol featured on the effigies. Bullet sniffs it for a scent, but this time it doesn't freak him out. Carver then tells Ellis to do the unthinkable, to shoot his dog and bury it. He obviously refuses, but Bullet runs off and gets wounded. Ellis is given messages to leave Bullet behind, such as "let dying dogs lie." Despite this, Ellis continues on walking through a loop for what seems to be an eternity, and eventually Ellis just passes out. He comes to and Bullet is no longer there. Carver mocks Ellis and taunts him about Bullet's apparent death. Ending up at the campsite again, Ellis finds a tape which gives a clue of Peter in a basement with Carver and a run-down house, and miraculously appears on top of a hill. He enters. Ellis then makes his way through the house, and after a long journey through looping corridors following the white paint, Ellis makes it to the basement, but Peter is not there. Carver has left a key under a table for a hatch in the floor. Ellis crawls out from underneath the house and confronts Carver. Ellis kills Carver, looks into a puddle, and realises something horrifying but slightly cliche. He has become Carver. Bullet then appears alive and well, but walks away after seeing Ellis as Carver, and the game ends. So that was the bad ending. Obviously it's the bad ending because Ellis became Carver, and of course Carver was Ellis all along. It's an extremely confusing time loop. The good ending is achieved by not destroying any of the effigies without fighting off any of the monsters, which means, you literally have to crawl around the forest in the dark. In two particular parts in the house you have the option to kill Lanning and pull the lever which kills Todd McKinnon, as instructed by the witch. If Ellis does this, he succumbs and becomes Carver, and the cycle goes on. But if he doesn't kill them, he breaks the cycle, but as a result is killed by Carver. But this also means that Peter survives and is picked up by a truck driver. But anyway, let's talk about Ellis. So we get a pretty good idea of Ellis's childhood and his background from the various psychiatrists' notes in the game. These are therapy sessions from various points throughout Ellis's past prior to joining the military. Let's look at them. In this image, we can see a drawing which depicts the weird forest creatures in it. Now, if this is from one of Ellis's therapy sessions, does this mean that he's encountered these creatures before? Well, let's dig a little deeper. In Psych Note 1, it states that Ellis had been referred for therapy by his parents due to having panic attacks related to a traumatic experience. It notes that Ellis avoided talking about the event and exhibits irrational aggression and disassociation. The second Psych Note states that Ellis has begun talking about the event. Ellis and a friend of his left his house and went into the woods. Ellis goes on to state that he finds a wounded animal, there is a man or wild beast, something happens, and then Ellis leaves the woods. The third Psych Note then goes on to state that Ellis now wants to stop therapy, but the note mentions that Ellis reconsiders after recalling seeing memories of being stood in a decrepit room corner, but it also says that Ellis refused to accept what happened to his friend. Psych Note number 4 states that finally accepting his friend's death in the woods has left some survivor's guilt in Ellis. It mentions that Ellis attacked a classmate after she was telling hunting stories regarding her father. Psych Note number 5 states that Ellis is now seeing the doctor monthly as opposed to 3 times a week, and he mentions that Ellis doesn't bring up the woods at all now, which kind of seems eerie. The doctor mentions that Ellis was offered a scholarship outside of Burkittsville, but doesn't want to leave. The doctor mentions that it seems like something is keeping him there. Psych Note number 6 states that Ellis is hearing a woman's voice calling to him from the woods. This may explain what's keeping him there in the last note. And finally, Psych Note number 7 states that Ellis is leaving Burkittsville to enlist in the military through the persuasion of his father, a colonel. The psychiatrist signs off by fearing that Ellis will just end up replacing his childhood trauma of the woods with the trauma of war, but states that the experience in the woods will always be with him. We then learn through flashbacks in the game that Ellis did in fact join the US military. We find a photo of his squad and the flashbacks resemble his time in the Gulf War. At some point, Ellis led his squad into a dangerous situation, which resulted in the death of some of his soldiers. Later on, still as a soldier, flashbacks show us that Ellis, while hiding from enemy forces, entered a woman's home and killed her in order to keep her from screaming and giving away his presence. The guilt and trauma these two events produced in Ellis led to deep mental scarring, which in turn led him to develop PTSD, which of course we see through military-infused flashbacks. Ellis joined the police force when he returned home, but this new career didn't last long, as one evening Ellis was called out to a report of a convenience store robbery. From what we see, Ellis had a PTSD attack and shot the unarmed victim. The victim's name was Adam Shannon. He's Peter Shannon's older brother. After this, Ellis descended further into depression and became an angry person, taking his frustration out on his estranged wife Jess. We see from a few calls in the game that they have a strained relationship, but it's clear that Jess still cares deeply about Ellis. Anyway, Ellis's colleagues viewed him as damaged goods and didn't want him on the force, but Sheriff Lanning stood by Ellis. As a way of helping Ellis, Lanning gifted him a Belgian Malinois called Bullet, who had been through a lot just like Ellis. At first, Ellis objected, but they soon became good friends. Sometime later, due to Peter Shannon's disappearance and due to Ellis's guilt and determination to make amends for shooting Adam, he joined the search for Peter, and this leads us to the point the game starts. But who was Ellis's friend who was referenced in the site meetings and who died in the woods? Here's who. Now, this may get a bit mind-scrambling, but I will do my best to unpack it. If this is Ellis, then this kid with the white sleeves must be Peter, as seen here in this red tape. We've already established that the whole thing is a loop, but every loop has to have a start and an end point, and here's how I think it all kicks off. Ellis and Peter enter the woods, which explains this footage here, and comes across Carver and Bullet, which explains this. Ellis escapes and ends up being picked up by a truck driver, but Peter is never found. Ellis undergoes his therapy and eventually develops dissociative amnesia, forgetting all about the event in the woods, the death of his friend, meeting Carver and Bullet, and possibly even forgetting who Peter was. Many years pass and Ellis leaves Burkittsville and enlists in the military. Ellis returns from the Gulf War mentally scarred and suffering from severe PTSD. He then meets and marries Jess. Ellis joins the police but suffers a PTSD episode and shoots Adam Shannon. Ellis then separates from Jess. Lanning gifts him Bullet to help with his trauma. Ellis then goes on to live in the woods. Judging from this letter, his veteran support request has been denied by the US Department of Veterans Affairs, so it's likely Ellis has just simply given up on life and ends up living in the underground bunker, but is manipulated by the witch and loses his mind over time, becoming Carver. I believe Ellis's loop starts here, and eventually the loop ends here. But here's the crazy part. 4 years have passed in the loop. I know, crazy, but bear with me. In Lanning's truck, when Ellis has to turn on the lights, on the seat is a missing persons report regarding the disappearance of the lumberjack called Todd McKinnon, dated the year 2000. That's 4 years after Peter went missing. Now, this is crucial. This is the reason why Ellis and Lanning weren't able to see each other under the tree. Ellis, at this point, is actually in the year 2000, and Lanning is still in 1996. Yet they are still able to communicate over the radio. This is the baffling mystery of Black Hills Forest in full display. Ellis then turns on the lights in the truck as instructed, and his timeline and Lanning's timeline is merged, with Carver having now killed Lanning. How on earth is this even possible without time warping and time manipulation? One glaringly obvious clue that Ellis was the bad guy all along was the tape named the Amicide, on which Lanning is brutally murdered by Carver. Amicide is the term used for murder by a close friend. Remember that I mentioned that Ellis went into the woods and lived in a bunker? Well, Lanning did actually keep in close contact with Ellis during this time, largely out of concern for his friend's mental state, given that he was suffering from PTSD and had split from his wife Jess. All of this reached its conclusion when Lanning was in the woods looking for Todd McKinnon and came across Ellis. We get a snapshot of this conversation, and Ellis says he's been living in the woods for 4 years as he likes the quiet.
So how many years has it been? 4. I like the quiet. Why are you recording this anyway?
Sheriff.
Then Ellis, who has now become Carver of course, kills Lanning. So if you're confused, then I'll sum up. The full timeline of events ends up looking like this. In 1996, Ellis and Peter Shannon enter the woods, which explains this footage, and are abducted. Ellis escapes and ends up being picked up by a truck driver, but Peter is never found. Ellis undergoes his therapy and eventually develops dissociative amnesia, forgetting all about the event in the woods, the death of his friend, and possibly even forgetting who Peter was. Ellis then leaves Burkittsville and enlists in the military, returns from the Gulf War with mental scarring and PTSD, meets and marries Jess, joins the police, suffers a PTSD episode and shoots Adam Shannon. Ellis separates from Jess, Lanning gifts him Bullet to help with his trauma. Then the loop starts. Ellis enters the woods having given up on life and then lives in the underground bunker, but is manipulated by the witch and loses his mind, becoming Carver. Carver kidnaps Peter under the manipulation of the witch, knowing that it'll draw Ellis to the woods. A new version of Ellis now enters the woods in search for Peter. 4 years later, in the year 2000, Carver kills Todd McKinnon and kills Bullet. While searching for Todd McKinnon, Carver kills Lanning. Ellis, whilst in the woods over the course of 4 years, changes into Carver, killing what is essentially himself, and becomes the new Carver. By the time that Ellis is fully transformed into Carver, the new version of Ellis has already entered the woods in 1996, and the loop and time warp craziness has started again. This is seen through the moment in the house where Ellis answers the radio in response to the new Ellis saying the light.
The light? The light? Turn on the lights. The headlights.
Turn them on.
Ellis goes on to kill Lanning, which is why this happens. It's honestly mind-boggling, and I told you it was very convoluted. Anyway, the new Ellis was initially on his way to go and live in the woods in isolation, just as he initially did, but heard the report of Peter's disappearance over the radio. But Ellis just thinks it's some kid whose brother he shot and wants to atone for it, and this is due to the dissociative amnesia. He doesn't remember his friendship with Peter. And rinse, and repeat. Until the cycle is broken, of course, but I do actually feel like I'm broken at this stage. Anyway, what the Blair Witch essentially allows Ellis and Carver to do is travel to different points within the 4-year time loop. Whilst the loop is 4 years, to Ellis it only seemed like a couple of days at the most. So utterly confusing, but I would be keen to hear your theory on the time loop aspect, so please leave a comment down below. Moving on. So as this game is based heavily on the legend of the Blair Witch, I should probably explain who the Blair Witch is. So the story's origins stretch way back to the 1700s, when Burkittsville used to be called the town of Blair. A woman named Ellie Kedwood was accused of being a witch. Found guilty, she was banished from the town of Blair and was said to have been executed in Black Hills Forest by the locals. After being tied to a tree, she was left to die. The legend goes that her angry spirit returned and roamed the area where she died, haunting any person who dared to enter her resting place. Over the years, many people went missing. 8 children in particular were found to have been murdered by the serial killer Rustin Parr in the 1940s. Parr allegedly killed these children under orders of the witch. Initially, Parr was a hermit, a friendly man who loved nature and built a 3-story house in the woods. He liked taking long walks, but on these walks began to see a woman in a black cloak who would disappear when he tried to approach her. He started to hear noises in the night and couldn't sleep as a result. Starting to see the woman in his dreams, he eventually then went insane, obeying the witch's every command. He kidnapped 8 children from the town and murdered them in pairs in the basement. But he didn't want eyes on him while he was killing, so he made one child stand in the corner facing the wall whilst he killed the other. This is a similar method used by Carver when he killed Peter. He made Ellis stare at the wall, judging from this note here. Yep, you heard that right, Ellis had met Carver when he was a kid. Carver was the man-beast thing which was referenced in his psych report. I know, mental. In actual fact, this drawing from the psychiatrist's notes shows that young Ellis actually did meet Carver and Bullet during his experience in the woods, but remember, older Ellis didn't remember them due to the amnesia. Anyway, the witch had done her business with poor old Rustin though, and made him go into the town to confess, and he was executed. The parents of the children burned the Parr house to the ground. So, the MO of kidnapping children seems very similar to what the witch was making Carver do. But why is Ellis a much older version of his younger self? Why does Lanning not wonder, why is this man now a much older version of Ellis Lynch? And where is young Ellis? Does he even exist in reality anymore due to the manipulation of time and reality given that he's now older? I mean, didn't he go into the woods with Peter? So that then leads to a new question of, why aren't the search party looking for 2 children? Why only 1? It appears the time manipulation may have indeed rewritten reality. Mind-blowing, but here goes. We discussed previously that the witch was able to manipulate time, and although the theory of time manipulation in the Blair Witch fanbase divides opinion, it's certainly a plausible explanation for what is happening in Black Hills Forest. You see, the witch, or the spirit of Ellie Kedwood, is a powerful and a malicious one. Regardless of whether she was really guilty of witchcraft or not, that is one angry spirit. In terms of the time travel or the time manipulation theory, this is shown best in the mockumentary called The Curse of the Blair Witch, where you'll see that Heather, Mike and Josh's footage was found in the foundations of the Parr house, undisturbed. But remember, the Parr house was burned down in the 1940s. How could their footage have ended up in the foundations of a house which was built decades before that footage was even filmed? Time manipulation is the only real explanation for this. This also kind of explains the red tape phenomenon. Items aren't simply appearing before Ellis. He is in fact travelling through time to that moment on the camera, which is why the Parr house just appears on the hill out of nowhere, which in itself opens up another can of worms in the fact that there must be a 3rd time period which Ellis visits, sometime in the 1940s as the house isn't burnt down. Anyway, this theory does explain why Heather, Mike and Josh came across the same area twice despite walking directly south for the whole day, and why they couldn't find their car and why no one came to look for them after they were due back in town. And also in the 2016 film, why Lisa's alarm goes off at 7 AM despite it being pitch black outside, and why Lane miraculously has a full beard at one point despite being clean shaven at the start. Due to this time warping and manipulation, it's certainly possible that Ellis has entered this loop as the older version of himself, but due to time manipulation, younger Ellis no longer exists in this time loop. So Peter goes into the woods alone due to the fact that Carver is manipulating reality through the time loop. The witch ended up using Carver, or Ellis, as a puppet to abduct Peter and draws Ellis into the woods to continue the loop forever. It's absolutely 100% fully ridiculous in all ways, but yet it is the only explanation that seems to make any sense to me. And that is basically it. A very complicated storyline and a concept, but I think we just about got through it. On a final note, I did mention earlier that the game's narrative drives you towards a bad ending. This is because the whole point of the game is that the Blair Witch manipulates you, Ellis, into becoming Carver, therefore tricking you into breaking totems and defeating weird creatures in the woods, which is what you kind of do, I guess. Anyway, you follow the instructions, which of course is you succumbing to the influence of the Blair Witch. But ultimately that is it for this video. If you did enjoy this one, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support. Leave a comment down below what you thought about this theory and this game. But for now guys, take care and I'll see you in the next one.